This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and we have a great show for you today. We are going to be talking about compliance. Wait, don't touch that clicker yet. This is really going to be a very interesting session about not only the preventative, but just talking about the kinds of issues that a company can get involved in if they aren't on top of their game as it goes to being clear on compliance. So my guest today has some great experience in this area, and I'd like to welcome Doug Lankler, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Compliance and Risk Officer for Pfizer. And Doug, we want to talk about when boards must focus on compliance, but you're actually in a very interesting situation with Pfizer. You're in a creative position that reports to the CEO and to the board. And could you explain to the audience exactly what your responsibilities are and sort of how Pfizer sort of got in the situation they have this unique setup?
Sure. So I think the primary role of the job is to ensure that we've properly assessed our risks. We know what the biggest potential issues are for us, that we've got systems and controls to make sure that we avoid problems in those areas, and that we appropriately and quickly respond to and remediate problems that come up. The whole name of the game is avoiding systemic issues, making sure that we're being proactive, finding problems before they turn into bigger issues, and putting a fence around them and taking care of them. That's what our board has always wanted us to do and expects us to deliver on. I think Pfizer, a company in the pharmaceutical industry, which is obviously very highly regulated, is like many other highly regulated companies. They've seen a massive explosion in terms of the expectations and requirements that both regulators and other stakeholders have, and a similarly large explosion in the overall exposure that companies can face if their problems are not appropriately addressed in a timely way. And that's really been something that has developed probably over the last 5 or 10 years in a radically quickly way, and something that has helped companies that do it right genuinely form a competitive advantage.
So Pfizer years back found itself in a little bit of a challenge and knew that they had to attack this in a new way. So they created this area, made sure it was sensitive to both the board and to management. And then you came in and sort of looked at the situation. Talk a little bit about your first days on trying to get your arms around sort of all that happened within the organization at that point.
Right. So I think the thing that was probably most helpful to me was first understanding that there was going to be a real focus on the biggest risks. A really strong level of support from other members of senior management, a genuine dedication, which I'm fortunate to have with my CEO and with my board, and an interest in ensuring that we make the right investments to push us in the right directions all the time in this area. I think the thing that unequivocally helped me the most with respect to the board was the heavy involvement of our audit committee in the 2004-2005 period in understanding where we were, helping us assess it, figure out what we were going to tackle first, how we were going to measure ourselves on an ongoing basis, and get genuine improvement over time so that we could move away from some of the issues that the company and the industry faced in the first half of 2000s.
We all know that the board meetings are chock full of information. The board comes in sometimes 4, sometimes 6 times a year. You know, you've got a huge agenda. Now you've got to sort of earn your time on the board. Can you talk about how you had to sort of use your time most effectively in those board meetings? How did you get sort of the third-party verification that the board knew that you guys were on the right path? And then how did they walk away in the end feeling comfortable that Pfizer was on top of the risk issues and compliance issues that needed to be? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think probably the most important thing in that regard is a clear agreement between the compliance officer and the board about the types of issues you're going to bring to their attention and the things you're not going to bring to their attention, so that they have a good understanding of the level of activity that's going on, and that they genuinely agree with the notion that you're going to manage the rest of this stuff, and if it rises to the level that we've agreed on, we're going to hear about it along with what your plan is for remediating it and making sure that it gets properly addressed. Certainly something that we found helpful is ensuring a close interaction with the business folks that are involved in the issues. Genuine accountability, them stepping up and saying, we own it, we're going to work with the compliance function to deliver a proper remediation if we have to. And that's always been the expectation of our CEO and our board as well. I like to remind our board that it shouldn't be surprising for them to hear me stand up and say we have an effective compliance program. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing a very good job if we don't. And I want them to, particularly given the exposures that board members face these days and the expectations that are ever increasing on board members, to have access to third parties who can genuinely verify the program. Take a look at it, interview people in the company, look at the policies and systems, benchmark them against outsiders. And there's a bunch of different groups that do this well. We've had law firms do it. We've had large accounting firms do it. We had Ethisphere do it as well. And interestingly, the different reports are viewed differently by board members, and they're genuinely appreciated when they can look at these things and hear from an independent or separated group in terms of their genuine opinion as they see it on the landscape of other companies, whether they're highly regulated or not. That's helped us a lot. Whether it's a law firm report or the Ethisphere report, which was well received because it comes from a different angle, is helpful to them and also provides a good record going forward. If you end up having a problem 2 or 3 years down the line, I think it's helpful for a board member to be able to say, wait a second, this was back in 2010. Wasn't that the year that we had an outside group take a look at this? Didn't that report tell us that in fact things were in good shape? So at the end of the day, there's human beings involved in this. Mistakes are going to be made. Things are going to happen. It's not always going to go exactly the way everybody wants it to go. We're reading constantly about whether it's large fines or executives being held accountable themselves criminally and otherwise for problems and breakdowns. So things are going to happen. No company wants these things to happen. No board wants these things to happen. And everybody's relying on each other to make sure that it moves forward in an appropriate way. Problems will occur. Having that outside check every now and then, in addition to obviously what the compliance officer and his or her team are doing on an everyday basis, is very helpful, I think.
So the outside check with a third party gives you more comfort on measuring yourself, and then gives the board more comfort in the sense that they have something other than internal information to look at.
And there are genuine metrics that these groups use. They'll look at how many issues you have, what are the nature of the issues, how strong are your policies and procedures, what is the culture, what is the attitude both of senior management and the everyday worker in the company towards compliance. Is the concept of integrity important? Does it resonate with people on a regular basis? These are great snippets of information that a board can use beyond what the compliance officer or the general counsel or anybody else who regularly appears before the board is telling them on an everyday basis.
If I was out there sitting watching this, I'd be thinking to myself, okay, what do I have to do so that I don't have to do anything extra for the regulators or create a special unit I can all manage this within my normal risk evaluation process. So if you had the chance to talk to our audience about the preventive versus having to be reactionary to some kind of notice or warning, what would you say to them? What are the things that you might share in the way to make sure that they are on the front end of this issue versus the back end?
Sure, and it goes directly to the nature of your question. It's all about being proactive, questioning management around the notion of what are your risks, how have you assessed those risks, what are you doing on a regular basis to ensure that you have a good sense as to whether or not those risks are coming to fruition. If you're involved in emerging markets, do you go to the emerging markets and shake the trees and look for issues that other companies have experienced? Are you making sure on a regular basis that people are properly trained? If you see other companies in your industry experiencing significant issues or problems, what is your company doing to make sure that they're not going to have those same problems? Not surprisingly, a lot of companies in the wake of some of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act issues that have arisen recently have looked carefully at their operations in Mexico and Russia and other places that have come up in the news more recently. Those are the right things to do, to be asking those questions, because companies can ensure that these issues are properly managed within their normal operations. And frankly, the more they're tied to the regular business operations, the more likely those issues are going to be avoided, because those people are genuinely incentivized and very knowledgeable about making sure that the problems don't arise.
Seems to me that if you can be effective with your risk and compliance, that means that a board has to spend less time on what clearly they find as the most aggravating and annoying part of their duties, and lets them focus on what they're really on the board for, which is to lend their guidance to the strategy and all the issues that will help competitively improve shareholder value.
No question.
Both of them affect shareholder value, but you'd like to spend less time on the compliance and the risk.
These problems are incredibly time consuming. They're very expensive to deal with, whether it's lawyers or forensic accounting that has to be done. The problems can really overtake the attention of a board, which, to your point, is much better served on making sure that the business is moving forward. So avoiding the problem in the first place, without question, the best route that you can take.
Doug Lankler, thanks for joining us, being so candid about the fray that you find yourself in on occasion. All that we hear, it's been handled with a lot of great class, so that's why we thought we'd invite you on. You're a great spokesperson for that particular area. And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope that you enjoyed the show, and will join us again next week when we'll take a look at another critical topic that will help you be a better committee member or board member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.